Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 1. The finale has just come out tonight, so we're going to be mainly talking about the finale in full spoilers. So if you have not seen the finale of The Last of Us or played the game, we're going to be getting into all of that stuff in this review. I'm also going to do just an overall thoughts on the season as a whole, and also what I think they're going to do to adapt the second game. Even though I'm not entirely done with the game, I'm almost done. I tried to beat it before this finale, but didn't have the time. So I'm just really excited to talk about The Last of Us here on this video. So like I said, spoilers for this finale, let's just jump right into this thing. So of course this episode starts off with the birth of Ellie from her mother Anna, who is played by Ashley Johnson, who is of course the voice of Ellie in the video game, and that is a great choice not only to, pass the torch from the actress who played her in the video game as the mother of the person who's going to play her inside of the show. So I thought that was a great little Easter egg. I thought they incorporated all the voice actors from the game very well into the show as a whole, but what I thought was most interesting about the scene was the idea and the choice to basically say this is how Ellie, and this is why Ellie is immune to the cordyceps in the first place. And I think some people who are lovers of the video game is going to say, oh, I like the mystery of it, I like not knowing it, or I like maybe the idea of it being completely random and more genetic than anything that is, caused directly from her mother being bit while she was pregnant, while she was giving birth. And so there's reasons why they have it here, because that's essentially what it was. The mother was fighting off this infected person as she's giving birth. And so even this very, very brief amount of time where this cordyceps could have gone and traveled through this child and kind of implanted itself inside of her brain and mutated and turned into something where she can grow and live with it. And they kind of explained that the fact that she has this cordyceps in her brain already, all the other infected people don't see her as a threat. Yes, she was bitten at the one point because the cordyceps, the infected, will attack people, but the actual infection itself will think that she's already infected and it won't do anything. And so I think the idea to explain this in the show makes sense to me, because you have things like The Walking Dead, which everybody knows that show, even if you've seen it or not, of The Walking Dead. And if you have seen the show, which that's one of the most popular shows of all time, that the idea of the zombie virus that is released inside of that show is never, at least even a little bit, explained in that whatsoever. There's no sort of explanation, there's no reason or anything with that. There's nobody who's immune, there's nothing you can possibly do about any of that. And so the show immediately separated itself from The Walking Dead by saying this is how the cordyceps happen. You have this environment that's heating up because of global warming, and you have the scientists basically say that if the environment goes up and cordyceps can evolve and mutate to be able to survive inside of humans, this terrifying thing can happen, and it feels very real and it feels very terrifying. And I think it also separates itself from what we lived in the past few years with our own pandemic with COVID, because it's showing something that's not a virus. This is a fungus that can take over somebody's mind and just hold them in this state of terror. It's not that somebody dies and comes back to life like a zombie. It immediately separates itself from it. And so to explain how she is immune, I think that is also a way to separate itself from something like The Walking Dead, where you're not saying that this is a very unknown thing and maybe there's a way to replicate this. I think some people might have that idea. It's like, okay, if the Fireflies maybe know that this is a possible thing and know that this is why Ellie is able to be immune, would they try to replicate it by sacrificing somebody who is pregnant in that exact same way? Or is that very brief amount of time where the mother was bitten to where it passed on to the child, and to when she cut off the umbilical cord, how brief of a time will it have to be in order to have this situation go exactly the way it is? So maybe it's a 1 in a million chance still. Maybe that can still satisfy the people that think that's still not a possibility, but I think it is an interesting choice in a show to explain all of that. And I think it's also interesting seeing this scene from the perspective of Marlene, because you never really get to see Marlene in either the show or the game very much at all. And I think that is also a flaw that I have with this series as a whole, is you don't get nearly enough Marlene to feel that impact that she makes the decision that, if we get Ellie and she has the cordyceps and she has this mutation in her brain, we have to kill Ellie in order to get this cure. And she makes that decision very fast in both the game and the show, but having this scene added on to show that she not only knew, Ellie's mother, but she knew her for her entire life, and how they talk about that. I think that it just gives a little bit more context to this relationship that makes that decision feel a little more strong. And light spoilers for the Last of Us Part 2, but to get a flashback and you get to see Marlene, talking to the doctor and learning the fact that Ellie has to be sacrificed for this cure inside of the second game, and that idea of her finding out that she has to sacrifice this girl that she promised to save all those years ago, and now she has to make that decision to cure the world, something that Joel is not able to do in either the game or the show, and she makes that decision in the second game. And I think that scene works better in the context of this season and that first game, but maybe we'll get it next season. But now getting into our two main characters, of course we have Joel and Ellie after the terrible events that happened in the last episode, and the trauma that Ellie faces, of course, is very, very spot on with the game. How she feels very disconnected, she feels very quiet, and instead Joel is the more talkative one because he's gotten to the point where he is so connected to Ellie that he really does see her as a second chance to have a daughter, and that's something that he refuses to lose. And so when he gets to a certain point, once they see the drafts and he says, we can go back, we can turn back now and go to Tommy's, we don't have to go through with this, and Ellie says, no, we can't do this halfway, we have to do it 100%. And that kind of more so even confirms the idea that if she was conferred to by Marlene and the doctors and saying that you have to die in order to save the world, if you can make the choice, would she make that choice? And I think absolutely 100% Ellie would have made that choice to do so. And I think that's on Marlene's character and on her decision to put her down into this sleep and not even give her the choice to be able to say, oh, I want to live or I want to die. The stakes are too high for her. And I think that's another thing that I think would have helped a little bit more in this show if you kind of have that scene where Marlene is making that decision to keep Ellie out of it, because that decision is very frustrating from an audience perspective, somebody who thinks maybe Marlene was right, or maybe it is a good thing for Ellie to be sacrificed for the world at large, or you can come at it from the other perspective that Joel is coming from, where he will absolutely just demolish everybody in his path to save Ellie because he cannot lose anybody again. And I think that moral conflict is very interesting. I think this game and this show, in terms of an adaptation, really does capture that beautifully in this finale. And so when it comes to Joel's perspective in all of this, in this moral dilemma that he's going to have over whether or not he wants to choose Ellie over the rest of the world, once he finds out that Ellie's already on that hospital bed, already going through the surgery or getting ready for the surgery, he will just absolutely mow through everybody to get to that point. And I know a lot of people had complaints about this show not having as much, enemies that you're going to face, especially when it comes to, I think it was episode 3 or 4, once you get to them inside of the car and it crashes and all those raiders are attacking them in, I think it was Kansas City in the show. Once you have that entire sequence in the show versus the game, and you have so many more people in the game that you have to fight and attack, I feel like having less people interacting with them throughout this entire show gives more impact to the amount of people that Joel has to go through in this finale. And the fact that he kills, his body count is absurdly high, and the brutality in these scenes and in this essentially montage of him going through the hospital just murdering so many people, you feel more conflicted with it because you haven't seen Joel to this extent be murderous. In the game, you kill so many people that you become so desensitized to it. And I think one of my biggest flaws with the game was once you got to that final, Firefly situation inside of that hospital and you mow down all these people, I already went through other levels that I found that was either more difficult or more entertaining, like the infected levels, like the skyscraper level, or like the level inside the tunnel that happens right before this. I thought all of those things were more entertaining, more fun, and felt even more terrifying and more imposing than it is when you're in a hospital with a bunch of goons just shooting at you, because that's a fairly simple thing. And so once I finally beat the game and it ended in the way that it did, I didn't have a problem with the storyline in terms of Joel and Ellie, and Joel making that decision to save Ellie over the world. I thought in terms of a character standpoint, that was a great way to end this game. But in terms of a climactic and gameplay standpoint, I felt like I had done all those things that I did in that final level 100 times before throughout the entirety of the game. And so when it comes to this show, you haven't seen Joel do that yet. You haven't seen that brutality. You haven't seen him just be as, I guess, morally compromised as he was inside of this moment, inside of this finale. And I think that has more impact in terms of his decision to do all those things. And when you're playing a game and you're as this character, you're like, yeah, we need to go save Ellie. But when you're watching it from an outside perspective, from a more objective point of view, I guess you can say, you can really make that decision of saying, oh, I think Joel might be doing the wrong thing here. And at this point in this review, I want to get into what happens in the second game. And I highly recommend you guys, if you don't know what happens in the second game, do not hear what I'm about to say of what happens in the second game, because there's a lot of spoilers. And like I said, I haven't finished the second game yet, so I don't know how things end, but I've gotten to the point where the perspective has shifted to another character. And so I really want to talk about this. I want to talk about my theories of what I think they're going to do in terms of an adaptation of that second game, because I think it could be very interesting. And so after I talk about the second game, I'm going to go ahead and talk about my overall thoughts on the season as a whole. And so if you just want to skip this section and go straight to that, go ahead and do that, because like I said, I don't want to ruin this for you guys if you're just a fan of the show and not of the game. So without further ado, let's just get into this thing. The second game starts in a way where you're playing as Ellie this time. She is the main protagonist that you play after in this version, and so you get to see Joel goes off on patrol and you kind of go off on a second patrol to a different area. It's snowy, it's very chilly, and all these things are happening, and Joel goes missing and you're as Ellie and you have to go and figure out what happened to him. And it also cuts to a different perspective of this character named Abby, who you don't really know who she is, and she has this mission, she has this drive to get to somewhere, and you don't really know why. And you also play as her from her perspective, and there's so many infected. And so what I will say about the second season, and I think they have already confirmed this in terms of the makers of the show, they said that they feel the criticism that people had of not having enough infected in this first season, which I definitely do have that complaint as well. I do think the infected levels inside of the game were much more entertaining for me than the normal people levels, the raiders and the random goons that you have to fight inside of the game. I always found the infected much more interesting. The fights with the bloaters were very sorely missing from this season, so I hope that they do a lot of that stuff inside of the second season as well. But you get so many infected in this opening scene of the second game that I feel like it is warranted as well. And so once you're playing from Abby's perspective, you run into Tommy and Joel and you fight off a bunch of infected, but once you get to the safe house, Abby turns and starts attacking Tommy and Joel, and what happens in this beginning of the game is absolutely traumatizing for all the players of the game, and is why if you ever hear that the second Last of Us is very, I guess, controversial, it's because Abby kills Joel at the beginning of this game in a very brutal way. And this is the main protagonist, at least the person you played as in the first game, and to see him die in this way and to see it in Ellie's perspective as she watches in terror, it reminds me a lot of the Glenn situation in The Walking Dead, which if you watch that show, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is absolutely brutal, and it is something that I find very fascinating because in the game you have Ellie going off on this giant's revenge tour, essentially trying to find Abby and trying to get revenge for what she did to Joel, and you slowly get to figure out why she did the things that she did. You get to see a more, I guess, concluding aspects of the character between Joel and Ellie in flashbacks, and see that she did eventually ask Joel what the truth was, what happened in the hospital, and he finally tells her that, you know, he made the decision to save her instead of saving the world, and that there was no other infected people. And you have that conversation in the game that kind of divides that relationship even more. And so Ellie feels so conflicted and so angry and so just driven by violence inside of the second game that it's kind of scary to watch, and you're playing through a perspective of a character that is already morally compromised from the very beginning of that game. And what's even worse, or maybe better depending on how much you like the second game, is you get to see from Abby's perspective as well. About halfway through the game you switch and now you're playing as Abby, and you get to replay through all the events that you just played through from her perspective, and you get to learn why she did the things that she did and how she's a daughter of that doctor that was killed by Joel in the season finale as well. And so they're kind of putting in all these different seeds inside of this first season that basically show Joel as somebody who is a dangerous person, that he might not be morally all right. And you also see the violence within Ellie's character, especially in the last episode where, you know, she took out the cannibals and the guy that was, you know, violating her at the end of that episode. And you get to see these two characters and how they are going to slowly evolve into what they are inside of the second game and what happens in the second game. And to have this Abby character possibly be hinted at, especially in this finale when you focus in on that doctor who is dead, and Joel did not even hesitate to shoot that guy in the face, and you just know that that is Abby's dad, and that is essentially the inciting incident for everything that happens inside of this second game and what's going to happen in the second season. And I really don't know how they're going to adapt it. And so I think there's two different ways that you can adapt this game into season 2, and I think that is to split up into actually two different seasons. You can have the season focusing on Ellie's perspective as season 2, and you have her drive for vengeance to go after Abby's character, and then you end on a cliffhanger with her confronting Abby, and then season 3 would be all of Abby's perspective. I don't think that they're going to go this route because I think that's a little tough to do, especially in terms of ending on that cliffhanger, how happy or how mad people are going to be. But there's so much that happens in the second game, and I think there's a lot of gameplay that you can easily cut out of the second game, just like you did with the first game, even though I think people are clamoring for more of that gameplay storylines inside of the series. And I think there's a lot of action in season 2, even more action than there was in the first game. And so I think that there is a way that they can do that while having much more action, while also focusing on the character drama like they do in this first season as well. But if you split up into two seasons, you're kind of dragging the storyline on for a very long time. And I think the other option is to just try to go for all of it and try to maybe cut between Abby and Ellie's perspective throughout. But either way, I'm extremely curious to see how they're going to go ahead and adapt the second game, because like I said, it is very controversial. I think that's mainly because of the choice to kill Joel at the very beginning of the game, but I think that does a lot for Ellie's character and her drive and her wants, and also kind of shows that this series isn't afraid to kill people, especially the main character or the secondary lead to that first game or to this first season. To see this happened to Pedro Pascal sounds absolutely just traumatizing. I do not want to see that, but at the same time, the storyline and the juiciness that it gets out of Ellie's character is so good, and I think that the gameplay in the second game is also so good that I think that this game is worth the effort to try to adapt it in a way that is still going to divide fans no matter what. I don't think you're going to adapt this new season and just have people all on the same page, because I think even in this finale that we got for season 1 with that choice that Joel makes, even the showrunner Craig Mazin said that you're supposed to feel conflicted about that decision. There's going to be people who agree with Marlene and what she decided to do. There's going to be people that agree with what Joel decided to do. There's going to be people that wish that Ellie had a choice in what happened, and you know, no matter what, you can't go back. What has happened, and all these actions will have consequences, and we will see that in season 2. And you're also going to feel either conflicted or not with the decisions that Ellie makes in the second game as well. And so I find it all very fascinating. I cannot wait to see what they do with that adaptation. Alright, so let's get into this season as a whole, just to wrap up this review. Like I said, if you skip that entire section and you play the second game, go back and listen to my thoughts, because I think adapting that second game could be very, very difficult, but also very rewarding if it's done well. So what did I think of this season overall? I thought that they focused on all the right things for an adaptation. They focused very much on the character drama, the character development, and the performances, and the overall quality of this show in terms of how it, you know, looked in terms of a production standpoint. This show felt like they put a good amount of money into it. It felt like the casting was great. I love Bella Ramsey in the show. I love Pedro Pascal in this show. I love how they handled all the voice actors also in this show as well. I thought it was all done extremely well. If I had any main problems, it will be the fact that they didn't have as much infected in this show as they did in the game, and that's even a flaw that I had in the game, because like I said, I enjoyed the infected levels of the game much more than the goons and the different, you know, raiders that you fought inside of the game as well. And so I hope season 2 goes in a direction where you kind of dive more into the infected aspects of this world building that you've set up very well in this first season. So that's really my only wish that I have for that second season, but I think it's in very good hands. I think Craig Mazin is a great showrunner for this. If you haven't seen Chernobyl, definitely go check it out. And I think Neil Druckmann is a master storyteller, and I think that's the way that he goes in season 2 can work, and to trust in these creatives behind the scenes, because they really know what they're doing. So that will be my review and my thoughts on season 1 of The Last of Us. What did you guys think? Comment down below all your guys' thoughts on the season finale, the season as a whole, and also what you think is going to happen in season 2 and the adaptation of that second game. I'm very curious to hear all your guys' thoughts, so comment down below. Also, if you like this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. Also, the Oscars were today, and I'm very happy, as you can see. So thanks everyone for watching this review, and I hope to see you all in my next one.